Our next unit is about agriculture, and we'll be covering how humans grow and raise food all over the world and what patterns and differences in agricultural practices we can find in different countries. To start with, let's talk about how the agricultural revolution came to be. So, when humans first domesticated plants and animals, they no longer relied on hunting and gathering. And that was known as the first agricultural revolution. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the chapter. And I know that we've mentioned it before in here. Agriculture itself originated in multiple hearths around the world. There's not one place where agriculture developed. So, for example, in Southwest Asia, we would have had crops like barley, wheat, lentils, and olives um, originate about 10,000 years ago. But in East Asia, we had rice and millet. In sub-Saharan Africa, we had sorghum, yams, millet, and rice. And in Latin America, plants like beans, cotton, potato, and corn or maize were domesticated. And this is the map that shows the different distribution of these original agricultural hearths. So here's our primary hearth for, well, peppers would have been domesticated more than 7 to 9,000 years ago, squash over 9,000 years ago, and then things like corn 3 to 7,000 years ago. So it tells you the oldest crops and the youngest and where they were domesticated. So here in Southwest Asia, we see first it was the yam. Here in Sub-Saharan Africa, first it was the yam, and here in Southwest Asia, we had things like different types of wheat and lentils. So the fact that wheat came from Southwest Asia or like the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, that's important to know. The thing that things like rice and soybean would have come from East Asia, so that's where China and Japan are. And then things that maize, again, originating in South and Central America, that's an important one to remember. We also had animal agriculture that originated in multiple herds around the world. So in Southwest Asia, we would have had things like cattle, goats, pigs, sheep, and dogs. So again, that's like the Middle East area. In Central Asia, horses were domesticated. And so keep in mind that animals also had different herds of origination. When you want to compare subsistence and commercial agriculture, these are terms we're going to use a lot. So subsistence agriculture is the production of food that's grown primarily for consumption by the farmer's own family. So you're mostly growing food to feed yourself. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll have a little bit extra to sell or save for the next year. Commercial agriculture, which is what's practiced in highly developed countries, is when you're producing food for sale off the farm. So you're going to have less farmers, less physical labor, and larger farms. So the term intensive agriculture refers to the amount of physical labor you're putting in. So if you're raising rice on a small plot of land and you're doing most of the work by hand, it takes a lot of human output to do that. So you're putting a lot of labor into that. It's on smaller amounts of land and you're physically doing a lot of work. That's intensive agriculture, and it's usually subsistence agriculture. Extensive means you're not putting as much physical labor in. And I'm not saying that farming's not a hard job for everybody. I'm saying that it takes less physical labor to drive a tractor than to, plow the land by hand or use an ox and walk behind it and plow the land. So it's large plots of land, mostly machine power, and it's going to be most commercial agriculture. And if you look at this map here, you can see the percent of the labor force that's engaged in agriculture. So in countries that have low agricultural densities, like the United States, it's a sign that we have commercial or extensive agriculture. While countries that are in the darker green areas, they would have high amounts of subsistence agriculture and high agricultural densities. The physiological density in these areas would also be very high. And here you see the amount of farmland per tractor. As you can see, the farmland per tractor is lower in the dark areas and high in the lighter areas, again, because they have less machinery and more human input. And so here's an example. So these farmers might have worked very hard that day, but they're using these large different harvesting machines. So this is labor extensive. It doesn't take as much physical human labor to do. And here's a family working the land on a small subsistence plot, and they are physically breaking up the earth before they can plant their seeds, or they're physically using these tools to harvest their crops. So that's labor intensive. It takes a lot of physical work to do. And that's it for today.